Hi guys, what's up? With Assassin's Creed Odyssey coming out soon, I figured it would be interesting to talk about the Peloponnesian War because, it's going to be based around the war between Athens and Sparta. Or if not based around it, it's at least going to involve the conflict, so it's at least worth mentioning. And as we all know, Athens lost that war horribly, but what would happen if Sparta indeed lost? Well, both Greek states operated very differently. Sparta focused heavily on their military and valued that sort of thing, whilst the Athenians valued literature and arts. But this also affected the way that their city-states were ruled, or at least the controlled city-states were ruled. So whilst the Spartans had a king, he was mostly in command of the military. He didn't have much political power outside of that. The laws and societal matters were taken care of by a group of 28 men elected by the people, who definitely 100% had to be 60 or over. Athens, on the other hand, was developing more of an empire. Now, Athens itself, much different from Sparta, used a system of democracy. That's not to say that Athens always used a system of democracy throughout its entire lifespan, and it's also not to say that every single city-state that was under its control or within its growing empire used democracy as a system as well, but Athens itself, for the most part, is seen as a democratic city. Now, before the Peloponnesian War actually began, there was a lot of conflict going on between Greece and Persia. At this point, just before the war's beginning, the Athenians really pushing the Persians back. Spartans, they weren't particularly pleased with this because they had to deal with their own problems like Helot revolts, and, well, they just didn't focus that much on the Persian conflict. There was also the fact that to do this, Athens was getting a lot of city-states and merging them into their growing empire. Their naval forces were very much growing, and they were controlling a lot of the coastal cities, while Sparta still had a good majority of the cities in the mainland, but Greece is of course separated quite a bit by sea, water, so a navy is still very significant here. And as you can imagine, the Athenians had the stronger naval force, while Spartans had the stronger military force. Now, Spartans feared the rapid growth of Athenians and what that would mean for them, so they engaged in the Peloponnesian War. And it ultimately ended in a truce agreement that held up for a few years. It looked a bit shaky when Samos, one of Athens' allies, decided to rebel, but the Athenians were able to quell the revolt without the Spartans having to help them. And if the Spartans had helped them, it would have surely resulted in the Phase 2 of the conflict. Phase 2 of the conflict began as the Athens continued to expand, and Corinth, an ally of Sparta, had their food supply and trade threatened. Megara and Aegina had become unwilling allies of Athens, and Athens themselves enforced the Megarian decree, which denied Megara economic transactions with Athens. As you might imagine, Sparta wasn't particularly pleased with this whole thing going down and the Delianian League becoming stronger, so the second phase of the conflict was continued when Sparta decided to make the first strike. Now, during the second phase, the Athenians built a wall around their city that led to one of their coastal cities. This allowed them to gain supplies from all of their other controlled territory, including Africa and Egypt, as well as other coastal cities around Greece, if they so chose. And whilst Athens did get very crowded, they were able to hold up in the city of Athens quite a bit. So Sparta led ground assaults around Athens and their controlled cities, and for the most part, it wasn't all that successful for Sparta. They were able to capture the city of Plataea, but most of their military campaigns around this time didn't go well. But luckily for the Spartans, things weren't exactly peachy for the Athenians either. The Athenians had to deal with the fact that whilst yes, they could definitely hold up for quite a while, and their navy was making life difficult for any coastal cities controlled by the Spartans, the Athenians had to deal with a plague. One of the places that they were doing trade with managed to allow a plague to enter the city, which of course was nothing good for the Athenians. And when you add plague to a crowded city full of angry people because a plague's going around, and you add the fact that the Athenian leader ended up, being felled, shall we say, to the plague, then you've got a bit of a problem on your hands. Of course, the Athenians got a new leader, but things weren't looking too great in Athens. And they were looking even more bleak for the Spartans because they were getting ready to surrender soon enough, thanks to this whole strategy on the Athenians. So it was paying off. But a Spartan hero rose up and he rallied the Spartans, gained them some military victories on the ground, and ultimately led Sparta to push the Athenians to the point where another peace treaty had to be signed. Of course, this leader and the Athenian leader that took over after the previous leader had died to a plague, they both end up dying in the same battle, but a peace treaty is signed, everything seems to be good, except the peace treaty was used by both sides to gain more land, to be a bit more crafty, and to expand and have more control. So as you can imagine, this eventually led to the third and final stage of the war. And during this final stage, a lot of places were rebelling and revolting against Athens. Naxos and Thassos were two cities that were part of the Delian League, which was a name for the allied cities of Athens. Now, when these two cities were defeated by the Athenian forces, they were made to tear down their surrounding walls, taxes were imposed on Thassos, and both city-states had their navies confiscated by the Athenians. There were more things that happened, but I think you get the point. I'm not saying Sparta were perfect angels, but it's things like this that really upset the rest of the Greek world enough for some to defect to Sparta. On top of that, Athens was still becoming a growing threat, and Persia didn't like this much, so they decided to fund the Spartans a bit, and with that they built up their navy. And so that, plus other Greek city-states giving them support, allowed them to finally, after some difficult battles, defeat the Athenians on the sea. And by that point, the Athenians were, screwed, because on the ground, the Spartans surely wrapped things up. And they did this by blockading Athens in, so they couldn't get enough food, and there was problems within the city, so eventually they were made to surrender by being starved out. Not a particularly proud moment for the Athenians, but there you can see some reasons for Athens' defeat. In this new timeline in which Athens actually wins the Peloponnesian War, first and foremost, they miraculously do not catch a plague from one of the city-states. Either they don't do business with that city-state for whatever reason, or it just doesn't have a plague to get to Athens. This allows Athens to keep up their central wall going, and, eventually, it works out for them, Sparta surrenders, and then they can include Spartan-controlled territories into the Delian League. Now, the reason why I'm saying the Athenians win at an earlier stage in the war rather than a later stage is because if they win at a later stage, there's no reason to think that much would change, because it's not like the Athenians didn't rebuild their military after being defeated by Sparta, and then simply just lose to new invading or conquesting peoples, like the Macedonians, for instance. So, in this new timeline, there's also the possibility that Persia sees Athens as a significant threat, and they might want to take them down as soon as possible. And it's not like in this new scenario the Persians could just snap their fingers and get rid of Athens. Perhaps even dangerous to their empire, perhaps the Athenians could turn the tides and actually defeat the Persians and take over all the land that they hold. Or this might mean that they come to some sort of more peaceful or more friendly terms with Sparta. Perhaps not, considering the fact that during their conflict with Sparta they weren't exactly treating their allies very nicely, and that was part of the reason why they saw so many defections. Which means no bolstered military, but then if they're joining hands with the Athenians, why would they need a bolstered military from the Persians anyways? What they actually do with Sparta, I'm not quite sure, because of course Sparta was their main foe. Perhaps they'd want to make an example out of Sparta. Whether Sparta itself would become part of the league, I'm not too sure. Of course, there is the possibility that Sparta could rebel again. Again, the Athenians treated their allied Greek states badly. Why would Sparta be exempt from that either? So there could be a larger scale revolt, and it could turn out that the Athenians lose all of the control that they would have gained from the Peloponnesian War, thanks to so many other city-states revolting. And at that point, there's no reason to see why the Persians wouldn't necessarily aid in this revolt, especially if they had major concerns about the Athenians in the first place. So in that case, history probably wouldn't change necessarily all that much. After the Peloponnesian War, the Macedonians come along and, they take advantage of the fact that Greece is significantly weakened. Now, Athens isn't destroyed, significantly ruined, or anything like that, so they do have a fighting military force to help defend themselves against the Macedonians doesn't make a difference. The Macedonians still more or less successfully invade Greece, so that was a problem. In this new timeline, I'm not necessarily saying that Greece would be able to regain its own lands in the face of the Macedonian invasions, but there's a genuine possibility that they wouldn't be defeated by the Macedonians. Now, if the Macedonians go ahead and conquer Persia, then there might be no hope for the Athenians. They may indeed still be conquered by the Macedonians, but if that doesn't happen, then, well, then there's no reason to think that Athens won't build more ships, expand more, claim more territories. I don't see how this wouldn't affect the Romans in any way, shape, or form, so go ahead and tell me in the comment section how you think this whole situation would affect the Romans. Now, when it comes to Alexander the Great specifically, I think you could chalk some of his success down to just luck, considering some of the tactics that he used and the fact that he developed this idea that, or at least he fought as if he was more or less unkillable, untouchable, immortal, as if he were protected by the gods, so to speak. You add in a more powerful Athens into this timeline and, well, things could go south. But that was the video. It actually took a lot longer to make and edit and all of that stuff, so I would genuinely appreciate a like and a share more so than usual. I'm also going to go ahead and probably leave the sources that I use for this video, but it's not just the sources for this video, it's the sources for a few other videos I've been working on as well. I'm kind of just meshing them all together because this whole sources thing is kind of an afterthought, and I don't remember necessarily which specific sources I use, so I'm just going to throw them all in the comment section, and then you can see for yourselves. It might be a bit much. Of course, if you're new to the channel and want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe, and until the next video, have a very good day. I've been Prime, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.